Welcome to Unmasking Social, where we talk about building real friendships and meaningful connections without masking who we truly are. I'm your host, Sharon Baum, a speech and language pathologist with an expertise in social thinking and how it relates to autism and ADHD, specifically with our teens and tweens. Let's dive in. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Unmasking Social. Today we have a highly regarded guest who has lived probably, 30, 40 different lives. Dr. Randolph Schiffer, you are here from your cabin in Santa Fe. I hope the weather's treating you well, because over here in New York City, we finally are getting some heat, which is great. But can you tell us a little bit about where this whole started for you, Dr. Randolph Schiffer, from being in the Vietnam War to coming back and then being so involved in the psychology field, to then merging that with psychiatry, to being a neuroscientist, to now being an author? Start from the beginning.
Well, Sharon, at this age where I am, one can look back on his or her life and make a narrative that fits it all, makes it seem as if it was all inevitable. But the truth is, at the time, through all these changes, I just went with the winds of change, both inside myself and outside myself. And I was fortunate I was able to become a different person in a way and to uh, get rewards from it. And I'm still doing that now.
Yeah, and so here you are, you were drafted to the Vietnam War way back when, right?
Actually, I wasn't drafted, Sharon. You're too young, but in the 1960s,
Young for
the
one.
central fact the, the central fact for young men in America, not the women, but for young men, was the Vietnam War. It could not be avoided unless you went to Canada or did something like that. You had to go with it or you had to go away from it. And whichever choice you made at that time, later you'd have regrets. So I chose to go with it, into it. I wasn't drafted because, let's be blunt, people with my social economic background and educational achievements, they didn't have to go and fight, but I did.
So you voluntarily enlisted in the Vietnam War at a time when it was difficult to make a decision one way or another because you would be living with regret. So it was kind of a catch.
Right. And you can tell that from the apologias that, well, now even our politicians are too young to have been in it, but the ones who were, they have scripted apologies for why they didn't go. And I decided in the mid 60s, I wasn't going to be like that. I would do it. And I did.
And so
And
you,
and I have regrets too. Let me be clear.
yeah,
So by going, I have terrible regrets. So there was no way to win.
yeah, there was no way to win, and the war, nobody won. But now you come back from the Vietnam War, and I know a little bit about the Vietnam War, not as much as you. I know how challenging that time period was. I know that there was a lot of unrest going on where there was a lot of people that were protesting and people just not really coming together. And then the veterans that were coming back home were now faced with a new reality. And I don't know what your new reality was like. Can you share with us a little bit of what your reality was like coming home? Because I know that it probably had a full warm embrace, like we would want to embrace our soldiers when they return home.
You put it far too mildly. I was born and bred to be a doctor. My father was a doctor. And 1968, as I finished, I applied to 3 medical schools, very high end, top 10 stature medical schools in the country, and they all took me. I'm not naming names because I'm trying to be gentler now in my old age. So
You're being
I,
so
wrote,
humble.
I wrote, you're the only one who ever said that. So I wrote them letters saying, thank you for accepting me. I feel I have to go and do my duty to serve in the Vietnam War, but I hope you will re-accept me when I come back, not knowing that they had a legal obligation to re-accept me because we were still under the World War II GI Bill. Well, I didn't know that either. I was 21 years old when I went. When I came back, they would not re-accept me. They would not. Most of them didn't give reasons, but a very prestigious Ivy League medical school, the associate dean for medical education, I had to stand up in front of him in the committee. He said, Randy, we're not taking you because you're a Vietnam veteran.
Wow.
That's how I only got into one medical school just by luck, I think, or maybe they made a mistake, my home school, the University of Michigan. Otherwise, I
Wow.
wouldn't have been able to go to medical school. So that's how it was at that time.
So there was just intense discrimination towards anybody who fought in the war trying to get into schools. And so now here you are, your passion was to be a doctor, even from before this point. And then now you
Yes.
are in medical school, you become a doctor. You not only become a doctor, there are a lot of things that happen along the way. You somehow also become really curious about the worlds of psychology and
Yes.
psychiatry. So what led you to entering the medical field, pursuing this degree, and then suddenly starting to think about, wait, okay, there's like a whole world around to be studied. There's a whole brain that is operating, that's controlling us, and that we need to lean into. Like, how did it evolve into that kind of study?
Sharon, I always had that idea. I was fascinated with behavior. I can't tell you where it came from. It was just there from an early age. I always wondered why people did or said the things they did and said. So I was a natural for psychiatry, which I crafted a residency after medical school in psychiatry. But as got into psychiatry, it occurred to me that many of these patients had neurology involvements too, in a way that psychiatry was not sensitive to at that time. So that's when I thought I'll have to do a neurology residency too, and fortunately, I did.
And so you do your neurology residency, which I know I'm not a doctor, but I'm a Jewish girl. So I'm a woman and I'm surrounded by many doctors in my life. And so I know that, I mean, the intensity of all of this, of choosing a path and then doing another residency and then doing specializing in something else, it really does take a lot of energy out of your life. And so you finish with this neurology residency and then you go on to practice in a hospital where you really connect with the patients and then also then pursue another outlet after neurology.
I did them together. There was always a tension in my work between the brain and the mind, if you will. I was always trying to ferret out how much of this is neurology, how much of this is psychiatry. Is there really a difference? Is that artificial? And I suspect if we get to some of the neuropsychiatric, an epidemic of neuropsychiatric syndromes in our teenage population here in the States right
Yeah.
now, I think I've came to think that that tension I could never really fully settle it because in a lot of these disorders that we're dealing with now in adolescence, it's hard to know whether they're really neurology or psychiatry. So I guess they're both in ways we don't understand yet.
You really spoke to something right now that I think of almost every day, which is as an SLP, as someone who specialized in individuals with autism, but the social communication, old school Asperger's, the DSM, you have to keep up or you're not politically correct. But basically, one thing that I struggle with even now in working with the teens and tweens and the children as a speech pathologist is really understanding fully what it is that's manifesting as a behavior versus what is manifesting due to a mental health crisis. And it could overlap. It could be a mental health challenge, and then that leads to behaviors. But sometimes behaviors are simply behaviors, right? So, I mean, I know that it's hard to settle this. This is like such a big debate within my field as well. But was there something along your journey within your own field that helped settle that confusion between simple behaviors versus this is a mental health condition?
No, I'm still confused. Let me
Okay.
ask you, with the therapies that you do with these people who have been diagnosed with autism, of whom we have an epidemic of diagnoses now, I'm not
Yeah.
sure the disease, if it is a disease, has changed, but now we have many more diagnoses. So do they respond to the type of therapies that you do?
So yeah, so now actually, so it's interesting. So that was my expertise for many years. Then I veered off into administration, educational administration, which isn't for people like me. And then I went back to clinical, which is where my heart's at. And so now I work with a variety of individuals with all sorts of language disorders and all types of things, including autism. But to your point, your question was about what happens in the therapy in terms of these behaviors that
Yeah.
you're working with.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, a lot of behaviors are exhibited now by pretty much every teen and tween I work with and every child, honestly. And what I mean by that is on a daily basis when I come to work, and it doesn't matter really I don't think which school I'm gonna be at, it's just kind of the level maybe or the scale of the behaviors. 90%, and again, I'm really bad at math, which is why I'm a speech pathologist, but I would say that 90% of what I'm dealing with in many of my sessions require some sort of behavioral attention in terms of if I want the child to learn. There's kind of a resistance to learning, and some researchers have attributed it to the screen time and the devices and going on them and spending so many hours on it so that when you're in school it's hard to learn or attend to tasks. But I've noticed over the last, because I've been in the field for 15 years, that these challenging behaviors are just much, much more prominent than they've ever been before.
Yeah, I think we have a whole host of these. The jargon now is neurodiversity. I call them neuropsychiatric syndromes. I think they probably have more of a neurologic basis than the schizophrenic mother or something. But I mean, there's autism spectrum disorders, there are the learning disorders, the movement disorders. I mean, there's just a whole host of them. And I think this is great because I'll call it neuropsychiatry, you can call it neurodiversity. That was a black forest, an unknown area when I was coming up in neurology and psychiatry, because they were thought to be fundamentally neurologic, but neurology isn't comfortable with doing behavior. There's some very discrete stroke syndromes, whatever neurology will do, but they're a little afraid of it. And the psychiatrists in general are not comfortable with it because they are neurologic like. And so I think that's still kind of a split that we have. Now, historically, it's interesting. Neurology used to do behavior in a big, big way before psychoanalysis came into the country after the turn of the previous century. The psychiatrists were in the asylums. They were custodial of the
Mhm.
severe mentally ill people in the asylums. But the neurotic, mild behavior things, anxiety, depression, whatever. The neurologists did that at that time. They did things like rest cures and that. But once psychoanalysis came in, psychiatry moved into that neurotic area. And now we have kind of a new wave of medical sciences. We're going to try to understand these disorders like autism. And I'm not sure any of the medical professions are really owning it yet.
When you say owning it, you mean fully embracing it, understanding it, or
Yeah,
the
yeah.
nuances of
Like
it?
do you have when you have physicians to coordinate with what you're doing, what specialties do they come from?
So, in general, the top person that I would coordinate with after someone gets a diagnosis would be the neuropsychologist, because the neuropsychologist is the one that does the evaluation. So, in terms of the medical team, I don't generally collaborate with doctors unless someone has a secondary or comorbid diagnosis that is related to a medical situation or a medical or mental health diagnosis.
Well, there you have it. This
Yeah.
particular neurodiversity syndrome is an orphan as far as the medical specialties. None of them really want it, and none of them are curious. I was always curious. They're not curious about it.
Yeah, well, you are very curious about a lot of things, which is why I think you've lived a life with a lot of different side dishes, I guess, or different real you honed in on so many different things and merged them together, which I think is a problem now in terms of merging and everybody siloed. I see it in my own field. I see it unfortunately in the medical field. And I don't know what the answer really is because I'm just one person who has a problem with this. Many other people do too. But when you mention this mental health component and how you merged it with psychiatry, and then that kind of took off at the time because there was neurology, but then there was also that psychoanalytic piece of it. And now what I find is that uh, if somebody does have a mental health diagnosis, a teen and tween, let's say, or a child or anybody really, they're sent to if they need medication to a psychiatrist who does trial and error, sees what medication works, and then they go to a psychologist separately who works with them on their specific mental health diagnosis. And sometimes the two are not speaking to each other, which is different than what used to be done when they would sometimes one person would provide both.
Yes, you see, psychiatry changed significantly during my time when I was a young psychiatry resident at major academic medical centers. The senior people were gifted therapists, usually with psychoanalytic backgrounds, but they knew psychopharmacology and they could integrate the two and they could do family and relationship therapies too. For about 15 years, I was away in neurology, and then, at the end of these, I came back and was chairman of a major psychiatry department, one of the 128 major academic medical centers, and
Wow.
it had changed. The residents were interested only in prescribing drugs, and diagnoses only subserved the prescription of these drugs, and they would pile the drugs on and debate about changing the dose of one of these 3 or 4 drugs. I thought that was terrible for psychiatry. I thought it was terrible. I tried to do something about it, but because I was chairman, I could.
Yeah.
They'd at least have to pretend to be interested in the person as a person with his or her conflicts, histories, relationships. But as soon as I left, I hear they just went back to prescribing drugs.
Yeah, it's so unfortunate. And again, I relate to it because in my own field, you have the speech therapist, the occupational therapist, right? Maybe a psychologist. And it takes very special people to really care. And you're one of those people that truly care and are very empathetic. And the reason why I know this is because I don't know if you mind if I pull out a quote. And you had stated this, if you don't mind me quoting this, and it nearly brought me to tears. And that's how I know how empathetic you are. And I understand also why, at the same time, people are so frustrated with the medical system as you described it now, because we don't really hear these words very often. But in, I believe it was 2021, you said in a interview related to the hospital that you had worked at for many years with many children, that because when you walk the corridors of University Hospital, death walks with you. The outcomes are uncertain. And when things go bad, all that you really have is your relationships with your patients and your families. When I heard you say that with such emphasis and such emotion, I just felt like, I don't know, I felt like, first of all, shivers came over me because I've never really heard a doctor ever speak like that in my entire life. And it just showed that you really have always valued these relationships beyond anything else. Where did that come from?
Well, I'll tell you where it went. It forced me out of medicine, when I was 62. You'll see me tear up here.
Sorry, didn't mean to make you cry.
No, no, I cry a lot.
Me too.
Toward the end, yeah, well, toward the end of my time in medicine, I started to cry, and I couldn't control it. It wasn't that I had a psychiatric syndrome, that I could tell. I just couldn't stop crying. One time, when I knew I had to quit, a family came to see me at the Cleveland Clinic, where I was head of the Center for Brain Health. They came from Florida, a wealthy family, with their doctor, and they brought the mater familia of the family. They brought her along. If CAT scans and MRI scans could cure the prion diseases, the doctors in Florida would have cured her, but no one knew what was wrong because the imaging was normal. She was getting worse every week. They came in. I had my physician assistant with me. We had a very nice consult room at the Cleveland Clinic. My practice toward the end was just to let them talk, not interrupt them, because they'll tell you what you need to know. And I let them talk, and then I could see that she had a prion disease and that she was gonna die, and I just started to cry, and I couldn't stop. So when it was over, I went outside, my physician assistant came with me, and she said, "Well, Doctor Schiffer, at least that family from Florida got what they came for," but I figured I had to quit then.
Because they got somebody to listen.
Well, they found out what was wrong with her, and when they found out, it was terrible,
Yeah, so
and
that's when you knew.
I'd had a lifetime of those things, so I
Of
just couldn't do
course.
it anymore.
Yeah, and it's interesting because a lot of people in medicine, and I have friends also who are nurses and so many other things. And when I go to the hospital, to visit people who aren't feeling well, I notice that a lot of them tell me when I ask them, how do you separate your feelings from the patient, especially when they're in such pain, especially when they're children and they're suffering so much, even though they're not your friend and they're not your family member, you see them struggling, they're in so much pain. How do you separate that? And a lot of them have told me that you just become desensitized and you don't feel anymore. And it seems like the opposite happened to you, where it's not like you stopped feeling, it's almost like you started feeling more.
I think what happens, and this was also related to Vietnam, what happens is when you're young, you repress it because you have to, or you can't go on. And you have to go on when you're young. And that works for a long time, but you just repress it, move on to the next patient, move on to the next hill position in Vietnam. Um, but then, and Freud talked about this, sometime in late middle life, in the 50s or so, he talked about the return of the repressed, and the mechanisms are different for everybody. I think it's much more common than we know because some people will hide it, but they'll tell you, I just am gotten, they're 56, 57, gotten a lot more emotional lately, they might say. So I think that's what happened to me, the return of the repressed. And when it came, I couldn't stop it, and I couldn't be a doctor anymore.
And that's so interesting that you say that. So many people repress their emotions in order to do a job that requires you to really separate your emotions. Otherwise, you'll break apart, right? You'll break down after everything that you see, all the pain and suffering. And then I feel like, in some level, though, you were in the military, you were in the Vietnam War. Did that prepare you at all for this long 35-year career in medicine?
Sometimes I thought they weren't that different. A lot of people died. It's not just, there's my story, but you see it in mild, like the nurses have this too. Like what you'll see with the nurses in the intensive care units, especially, or the emergency room, high impact places, high mortality environments. They'll go along for 10 years or 12 years, and then they can't do it either, and they move.
Right. Yeah.
So I think it's not just me. I think it's quite common.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I mean, you worked for 35 years. That's a very long time from my perspective, especially I'm a millennial, but I know that millennials can't keep a job for more than a few years, right? They're always moving around. But 35 years is it's a very long journey. But now it's what's fascinating is that you're not just a doctor and you've never just been a doctor. You're also a father. You're a veteran. You're also someone who is an educator and an author. And I know that you have such a connection to children because one of the books, the most recent book that you wrote that you're really focused in on right now, is Bedtime Stories That Terrify Children, correct?
Oh yeah, I got a picture of it there.
Yes. And when I was doing some deep digging and research on this book, my first instinct was, is he trying to terrify all our children? What's going on? Which I feel like would be, the common response, terrifying, like what's going on here. So this book delves into some stories that can really challenge someone during a very critical time of the day, because I feel like nighttime is when children are most vulnerable or most susceptible to being scared. They pull every excuse out of the book not to go to sleep, to just avoid the whatever the fear is. And so you tackle the fear head on here and say, here you go, read a bunch of bedtime stories. But it's so much more than that. Can you tell us a little bit, without revealing all of it, what it really is about?
Well, you see, Sharon, these kind of teenage, adolescent neuropsych disorders that we've been talking about, many of them rest upon failures, in my opinion, of earlier stage emotional learning. The type of learning that maybe from age 3 on, when children learn about the core values of Western civilization, not the least of which is courage, not not to do without fear, but the ability to act, speak, and think in spite of fear. That has to be learned. We have a ton of fearful infants and anxious infants. Every mother knows that, and toddlers, but we don't have any courageous infants or toddlers. That has to be learned, along with some of the other core values of Western civilization, in my opinion: responsibility, the ability to make mistakes and recover, generativity, others I could get into. But that book is about courage, learning how to overcome fear, because my wife and I had 2 children. Well, we still have them, they're big now, but
Hmm.
one of them had leukemia at age 3, and I knew what lay ahead for him. It was a several-year ordeal, and the ALL that he had, acute lymphocytic leukemia, had a 50% mortality at that time. I'd taken care of these children. I knew a lot about him. Not all of that mortality was from the cancer. A significant part of it was the children and the families were unable to endure the long and painful treatment. So I designed these bedtime stories for our son to toughen him up.
Really? So you wrote this while he was sick?
I didn't write them, I told him I would serialize them
You
in
would
the first
literally
year.
tell him these stories to give him courage and resilience so that he could push
Yeah,
forward.
and it
Wow.
yeah, and I put and the younger one was the younger boy was there too, and I put them in the stories as so that they would be heavily identified and involved with the conflicts between good and evil, the necessity to do difficult things, to take responsibility, to endure pain. So now our son did survive. He's a financial executive now. He's married. He has his own family. Whether the
Mhm.
stories made that come true, well, they didn't hurt. And the two boys occasionally they will still talk about those stories.
Wow. So he was 3 years old at the time, you were young parents, you had another son
Right.
who was younger, you said, a
Right.
baby.
Right.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, that shakes any family, and especially when you have this individual that is your not just a patient, now it becomes your son, and you almost know too much about it, right? Because it's always gonna be hard, to deal with a sick child. I mean, hard's not even the word. Like, there are so many layers of complexities and psychology, when you have to deal with a sick child and watch what they have to go through. Interestingly enough, you took the perspective of, "Okay, I'm gonna toughen him up. I'm gonna make him strong. I'm gonna make sure that he's resilient." Is this a message to society in general right now?
Absolutely. This is something that all children have to learn. I'm calling it courage with a small c. The ability to, because I think that we are raising generations of timid and fearful people right now. People
Mhm.
who feel unsafe in going to a Yale College English lecture. So, so I think it's so. The question I asked myself was, well, how do children, since they're not born with it, how do they learn to be a little bit courageous? And the answer is heavily from identification with the parents in various ways, but also, I believe, from bedtime stories, which are almost universal. And I don't have to say it, but I will say it. I think a lot of the children's books in the windows of children's bookstores are pretty swishy right now about a small lamb who totally melts down when she gets separated from her flock and is incapacitated. I think we need a little more fortitude in the stories that we tell our children.
It's
And that's why I
interesting.
wrote the book, so people would have those.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. I mean, and it is a message to society, so for anybody who picks up a copy, because I relate to what you're saying 100%. I think my generation, the way we were raised was work hard, be strong, be courageous, like you're saying.
Yeah.
And not every family's different. I'm just saying from a cultural standpoint, it was more about, oh, you get you get put knocked down, you do everything you can to get back up because failure is just going to be a part of the journey, and like you still have to work. And then what I'm noticing with the generation that's the two generations that are coming after me, which is Generation Z and then Generation Alpha, is that, and again, it's, I know, case by case basis, everybody's an individual, but I'm noticing in working with these individuals that even from a young point, a young age, they don't necessarily inherently understand what that means, even what the word resilient means, just because I think that in the home life, perhaps, I'm not judging anybody, but perhaps things have become very soft in the sense of how you speak to the child. You have to speak in a very soft way all the time. You have to make sure that you accept everything that they're doing and make sure that you validate everything. And I think modern psychology has also maybe impacted this as well because I'm just like a down to earth person who doesn't really connect so much to these woo like modern pop. I think just maybe just speaking to people in a very soft way without giving them any sort of direction.
I think it's a serious problem, and obviously you had some of these strengthening emotional experiences. So what's the result of all this? Well, I'll tell you using, again, my medical academic help medical center experiences without naming places or names. I was back at one of them a few years ago, and the dean was complaining to me they had hired a general surgeon from one of the Ivy League general surgery programs, 5 years as a general surgeon with glowing letters of skill and temperament. So they got him into their surgery department, and he refused to be on call. He was terrified. He said he had never operated alone, so he couldn't be on call. What's wrong with that picture? A general surgery residency of 5 years, and the guy had never operated in the emergency room on his own?
Yeah, and I have a lot to say on that. I don't know how much I should say, but you mentioned that this was an individual from a very top school, an Ivy League school, right? He didn't operate alone before, so he was terrified to operate. Sometimes I almost feel like people who may not be from the Ivy League school, who worked even triple hard, right, to just be in a mediocre school. I went to Continue University of New York, and it was the best bang for my buck, but sometimes they may have to work a little harder and face certain challenges and obstacles. I'm not saying that everybody should create obstacles for themselves and then, not go to an Ivy League college, but I do believe that resilience sometimes is built also when you're having to work even extra hard to get to that point. But I could be wrong about that.
No, I think this kind of developing the core values and virtues of our culture, emotional control, responsibility, generativity, courage, the development of those never ends. But I think it's very important for the toddler age children, like our two boys, ages whatever, 3 to 10. I think it's very important for the parents to not be afraid to share their own fears and uncertainties and difficulties with the children, to talk about death or whatever, and not worry that it will be hard on the children. And I think that we can do a lot of better with our bedtime stories, especially if people buy my book.
So, yeah, it's very interesting that you say that because I have a little anecdotal about this. So, recently I was at a friend's house and the child's 4 years old and he's very cute and plays soccer and is in PK, very social, 3.5, maybe almost 4 years old. I hope she's not listening. But anyway, regardless, there was a conversation where he was asking, I overheard him ask his father about death. Gonna die, like when are you gonna die? And it's something that maybe came up at school or who knows where he heard this. And the father was trying to shut down the conversation and say, well, no, I'm gonna live a long time, dad's gonna live a long time, like you don't have to worry about that. And it just kind of tried to shy away from the death topic. And then I was over a few weeks later for dinner, and I mentioned something that was death related, but not like so. I work with kids, so it wasn't anything so gruesome and vulgar. And the father immediately said, oh yeah, don't mention that. Like he's been asking questions about death. How would you respond
See,
to
the father was afraid of the topic, not the child, but the child is learning from the father. So another myth about parenting, which parenting is the most difficult task of life, but the
right?
idea that it's quality time, not quantity time, right? Baloney. It's quantity time or at least dependable availability so that you can't, as a child goes by, whether the child's 8 or 18, you can't say, Mary, do you want to talk with me about drugs? She'll say, what's with you? If you're there in a dependable way, and now and then she'll stop, she'll sit down when she is ready. See, it's very selfish for us parents to do these things on our schedule. It's got to be on theirs. She'll sit down and say, Dad, am I pretty? But you can't schedule that.
Yeah. You can't it's so interesting. You can't schedule these moments. I'm not a parent yet. The reality is you can't schedule topics or fears that come into someone's mind, right? Like the mind is so complicated and why certain topics come up to someone at a certain point versus coming up to someone else at a certain point. It could be for a variety of reasons. Maybe they heard something. Maybe they're more interested. Maybe they're more intrigued. But I love the way you phrased you can't schedule. I guess in this situation, the father's trying to schedule it. The father maybe decided that 10 years old is the right time, 11 years old is the correct time.
It might be other things, but this is why parenting is so difficult. The core skill of parenting is generativity. Everything we do, say, and think has to be crafted for the good of the child, not to make us feel good, not to be convenient for us, or we have to get as close to that ideal as we can because that is how they learn. They learn when they are ready. And if you're the type of parent who is available, receptive, they'll come to you when these mega transformational issues are in their minds.
So just like the book that you wrote, and actually it wasn't even before it was written, it was orally spoken to your child as a 3-year-old. Um, Along those lines of thinking, then ultimately we should address. It doesn't matter what age. We should address the fear that is coming up. We shouldn't necessarily
Well,
ignore
the
the fear. Yeah,
right. See, here's what I would say about that. Now, this is just my experience and whatever, but the bedtime stories are give us that agenda. We craft the stories so the children will hear the myths, the heroic myths and heroic figures of our culture. They will hear about the evil spirits in our culture too, about the tension between them, about how children act heroically or cowardly at times. In the bedtime stories book, there's both sides. The children internalize those mythologic figures, they take them with us. So here, unlike what I was saying about, I'm going to schedule quality time with you this morning, Mary, or whatever, and she'll say, "Get out of here." Here we can control the transmission of these mythic figures, and we don't need you and I don't even need to personalize this. We know we have certain mythologic figure models in our unconscious and preconscious from childhood, and they stabilize us. They sustain us.
the mythical creatures from our childhood or whatever those creatures
It could be a hero
represent.
I would say all the bedtime stories, there's 8 of them, they end well. There's a hero in each one. So my hope is, depends on how you tell them, but I think this did work out for our 2 boys. You want the heroic figure to be the heavy identification with them. And if they're active in the story, they'll participate. They'll say, "No, I don't wanna hear, oh, no, I wanna go back to," and they'll say, "No, I don't want anything to happen to the dog here. Do you have that? Okay," so they participate in it.
And so,
But
oh, sorry, no, you go.
internalized those internalized mythologic figures are extremely powerful in adult life, and if we had another time, I would, and I was maybe whatever, I might tell some stories about it, but not now.
Okay, that's for a different reading. Maybe at the Yale symposium that I heard about. But yeah, regardless, so just to weave this together, I mean, resilience is such a broad word and it's something that we think about all the time. And it's something that students across the country and every country read books about resilience. And in many stories that they read, whether it's about history or it's English literature, the theme comes up over and over again. And I know this because I work in a school and I have worked in a school for countless years, that theme of resilience, but then it's actualizing it. It's actualizing resilience into your own life. So when you crafted these stories of resilience, were you thinking specifically about your son and what he was dealing with, or was it just was it how you were feeling in the moment, or was it just stories that were just coming to mind?
I'll answer. The bottom line is, as I said, they just came out.
They just came out.
But I
Yeah.
think the right stories came out. But on resilience, I'll make this comment. I think resilience is a different word from when I talk about courage, I'm talking specifically about fear and anxiety, living with it, acting with it. Resilience to me has a broader meaning about some of these other important core virtues in our society. And I would say resilience to me is closest to what I call responsibility. What is responsibility? Responsibility is the ability to say, I have failed, but I will go on, to take responsibility for it and to learn from it. I'll just be totally blunt, we
Sure.
have thousands of leaders in academics, in politics, in corporations who, when something goes wrong, it's never their responsibility. We will know that we have found our true leader that we're looking for when we find someone who takes responsibility herself.
It's
But
so
I haven't seen
true.
one yet.
Yeah, no, I know it's very hard in leadership because I've observed in leadership in so many different industries, whether it's corporate, health, education. I've observed from colleagues, from friends, from myself, that a lot of times the accountability will fall off the leader, and the leader will then maybe put that accountability onto somebody else. And so that's really like the tricky
It doesn't fall off the leader shucks
kind.
it off.
I'm being sarcastic. No, yeah, it just magically just kind of falls off, magically. No, someone else gets the blame for it. And typically it's someone who works for that
Right.
leader. And that's why it's important, like you said, to have good leaders who are courageous that model this courage.
And you see, we know that it was his fault or her fault. So we're wired up to know when someone's a phony or when someone is a real person, an authentic person. So, I mean, we have many problems as to trust in our leaders now in whatever domain, but this is part of that. Where's the one who says, I made a mistake here and I take full responsibility? We
Yeah,
don't
and
hear those words.
no, I don't I rarely hear that in general in terms of I take accountability for this in the workplace or like you said from leaders that are in political sphere. The word I take accountability, yeah, it's not a phrase that is commonly used. And at the same time, resilience and courage or the fear of what will happen if you take accountability is something that you're really working on because people just aren't really doing that. And so courage, like you said, is a little different because it's really facing your fears head on, even if it seems insurmountable because the anxiety is driving the fear essentially.
Yeah. But you see, if we don't take responsibility for our failures, we cannot improve. If it wasn't our fault, then we don't have to change or look into ourselves for why we did this.
So I'm curious, is it being the doctor that you were, the unique doctor? Because again, I haven't met many doctors that have said things in the way that you say that are so empathetic. Is it the way that you approached medicine all those years that allowed you to see, hey, patients need courage, patients need to face the fear. It's really scary. Families are very fearful. Was that what helped you during that time of crisis when your son was facing such a big challenge?
I don't have a good answer to that. I would say, probably I learned most about responsibility from being an infantry officer in the Marines, because there you can't you can't shuck the responsibility off. You own it, the good and the bad.
Maybe everyone needs to go to the military. No, I'm not sometimes I say that it really does fortify you in a way that's really difficult. But
Well, again, this is we're getting yeah, I think it wouldn't be bad if everyone were required to genuinely do some service for the country, uh, uh, because I think another core virtue, which is terribly lost now, I think, is duty. The duty to God, to country, and to family and friends, doing things because it's a duty to do. We don't hear much about that from our leaders either, but in the
right.
military, you do.
So in the military, yeah, that's something that's repeated, and I think that really shaped who you are. I'm speaking for you, but just your experience in the Vietnam War probably tremendously impacted you and brought you full circle to this point, and bringing you back full circle to this point. So now you have this book. You're on this book tour. You're spreading awareness. You're hanging out with the kids. What does it feel like to be in this new era, a new chapter of your life where you get to go to children, hang out with them, share these stories with them, let the book out there?
I really like it. I really like it because now I can play with the children and become again a child, because that's another core skill of parenting. You have to become a child to be a good parent. So now I can do that again long after our two boys grew up, and I can say whatever I want now, and I can't get into too much trouble.
Isn't that great to reach that point in life where you could
Yeah,
just say exactly
yeah,
what you feel, you don't have to hide? I'm not at that stage yet,
right.
so I still have to hide a little bit, but I wish I could say I mean, I still, I'm still working. Sometimes I don't have a full filter. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, and we say things straight up, but you still we're living in a really crazy world right now, that's why I relate so much to what you're saying about courage because people are even scared to speak on behalf of what they really feel, whether it's politically, whether it's related to the job. People are terrified to speak up. So I think that that's really important to teach, even from a young child, that advocating, even if it's something different than someone else, is okay.
Now that quality, I call that my list of about 7 key cultural virtues is what I call, as a psychiatrist, authenticity. That is knowing who you knowing who you are, that's a lifelong task. It's never knowing who you are and being that person, whether in whatever circumstance in which you find yourself. Now, that's an ideal goal, but that is an important goal for when you get old, like me. When you look back on your life, you don't want to have structural regrets because then in these late years, if you have structural regrets, it's too late to correct them, and those people are afraid to die.
Interesting. So the people who are afraid to die are the ones with the structural regrets who may have not been their authentic
They have
self.
unfinished business in some way or other. I presided over many, many deaths, and this I learned from them.
Wow. You are just so inspiring, Dr. Schiffer. You have accomplished so much in your life, like so many things. I mean, when I read your bio at first, I just thought, like, is this real? Just because you've not only accomplished so many things, but you also have pivoted in ways that you can help children, like beyond just being a doctor, but really having an impact on their core fears and trying to build up resilience and courage, whether it's someone who's neurodivergent or not, or whether it's someone with a mental illness or a family struggling with an individual who has a medical illness, teaching them this courage from a young age. I think that there needs to be more people like you that speak about courage because I don't think we have enough courage. I don't think I have enough courage, even though I grew up being taught that.
In my entire life, Sharon, I never met anyone who said, before just what you said, that we need more people like me.
Really?
I've met some people who thought we needed less people like me.
Could it be that there's an authenticity connection here? Like
Yes,
maybe because you're authentic and I
yes, I was
respect your authenticity and don't disregard it?
well, I tried to in my work, I was responsible for big organizations and lots of people, and I tried to be the same person and to be true to my core values, and I was fired from every medical job I had.
Of course you were, because you were being your true self, and nobody likes that. I learned that, by the way. It took me time, and thankfully, I have a really good friend that helped me along that journey. But unfortunately, I learned I was so naive at some point that they just don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear what you have to say if it's not exactly what they want to hear.
Right.
So yeah, being the bold individual that you are, and like you said, like now you're finally free to say what's on your mind. Back then, their response to it was more of a no. We want someone a little bit more robotic, perhaps, which
Yeah, well, you
is
see,
still going on.
if there's some big injustice or big structural error in either medicine or the Marines, if you let it go, people get hurt, and then when you're my age, you have to live with it.
Right. So when you look back, you think about those times where they let you go or fired you for being true to yourself and saving people from harm. And now you don't have to think of it now and be regretful. So I think that
Right.
and the people that unfortunately make those calls to not be authentic or not live according to those values or to the core values that as humans we generally connect to, unfortunately later on the pain creeps in and the regret comes in, and it's almost like the delayed pain as opposed to just dealing with the pain in the moment.
So that always sustained me. I knew there'd be a life review court coming, and that helped me do the right things.
The justice system at the end of life, right? But you're not there yet. You have a
Yeah,
whole more
it's
second life to live. You have a next chapter with this book coming out, and there's so much
right,
more to come. You keep calling yourself old
right.
and everything, but there's a whole new life. I mean, just coming out of this whole new way of spreading awareness to people and children and having them face their fears. Like, this is like a second chapter for you.
Right, it is, and I'm launched into it now.
Yeah, and I can't thank you enough for being here and sharing. There's so much you could share. Like I feel like I could speak to you for so many hours because there are so many topics I want to address and share and share in with because you have so many different lives and different insights into anything. But I feel like out of all the episodes, and this is the 43rd episode, out of all the episodes, this has been the one that I think I've learned the most life lessons from. So I
Well, it's very flattering. I thank you.
yeah,
I
and
love to hear flattery.
but no, but really, I mean, I'm not just saying that. I mean, that is a reality. And I think that everybody who's listening, whether they're a parent, a professional, a teen and tween that's struggling because life is hard, like, I think the theme here is courage is there. Fear is scary, but it's more scary to go away from the fear than face the fear. And ultimately, if you can face the fear with your child, or if you, as a child, can do that, then you can overcome pretty much anything, it sounds like.
Right.
Thank you so much, Dr. Schiffer, for being here. I hope that you enjoy the cabin. It looks really nice. I'm in the urban concrete jungle, so I wish I was in a cabin right now. But I hope you continue doing all the good that you're doing and all the writing that you're doing.
Well, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it too.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us on Unmasking Social, where we neurodiverse advocates and those who support them explore how real friendship begins when we start showing up as ourselves. If today's episode resonated with you, please share it with a friend, leave a review, or follow me for more conversations that provide information on neurodivergent ways of thinking, communicating, and connecting. Until next time, keep staying social.